I am Jessica Santiago, the CEO and founder of Art Republic. Art Republic is a curation platform. We've specialized in contemporary digital art for over the last 9 years, and we help enterprises turn their spaces into community hubs, transforming our public spaces into art experiences. So tonight we're going to hear from 3 incredible artists that we've worked with over the years who've had a tremendous impact on the medium of digital art, and explore where digital art is going and where digital aesthetics is heading. So with that, I'll welcome Ben Heim, Lars, and Ria. So to start, let's open up with your origin story, how you found your way into digital art.
All right, yeah, I'm Lars. I found digital art through a kind of interesting path. I was working at Google, and I'd been on this team called Visual Analytics, and what we did there was try to understand the behavior of Google's really large, massive distributed storage systems through a visual lens. And it was a very unique team because Google's software systems were so large and so complex that their behavior looked almost more biological at times than something you'd expect from software. And it was on that team where the work of my then mentor and manager, Wim DePauw, who'd been doing this kind of visualization work for over 30 years, going back to IBM research, really caught my eye, and I, for the first time, sort of clicked that you could make really beautiful visuals that tell a story using only code as the medium. And that sort of opened this gateway for me into using code to craft visual stories. And I, at that point, got a pen plotter, which is like this little robot that draws on paper with a pen, and became really obsessive during the shelter-in-place period, making thousands of these pen plots, and then at some point found how rewarding it was to make work for a screen. Yeah, that's my story.
Yeah, for me, I've always been an artist. I've always been drawing and making things out of clay and just anything that I can get my hands on. I was playing with Photoshop for a very long time, and then, was always a fan of animation and just started to get really curious about how to make things move. I remember trying to learn After Effects, and it's kind of like Photoshop for video, and getting to kind of just play around with things, and then that led me into making a bunch of sort of anything I could to make move, people, faces, and just, I think the nature of like me, I'm a pretty maximalist type of person. After a while, I was just trying to make all kind of details and everything move, and then I wondered what the next level of that was, which was to become abstract and sort of take out all the focus or the people or the subjects and try to just kind of delve more into meditative type work. And yeah, it's been a pretty crazy journey, kind of just using all the tools that come out over the years to try to just, yeah, just convey a feeling. And yeah.
Hey everyone, my name is Ben Heim. I'm an Australian audiovisual composer and digital artist. So I came into digital art a bit of a different way too. I was a musician first. All my training was in music. I come from a family of artists, but I could never draw. And so I was like, well, I guess I'm not going to be an artist then. And I became a musician. And I was writing a lot of contemporary classical music, film music, things like that. And I was a part of this big concert series in Australia and London where we'd take a unique venue and fill it with surround sound and do these like strings and piano and kind of these concerts. And we would often have visual components, and that would be like projections on the walls or something like that. And so I sort of got obsessed with the visual aspect of these performances and trying to find a way to have the visuals be more and more connected to the music. And that led me down the rabbit hole of generative art, and specifically generative real-time art, because generative real-time art is making art with code and that runs in real time. So all the frames are generated right there on the spot on the GPU. And when you have generative real-time art, that means that you can add a whole heap of stuff as interactions to it, because everything's being generated. It's not pre-programmed. So you can add audio reaction, you can add interaction, you can add data APIs coming in, all of these different ways to affect it. And my main focus was in music and having it react to the music, but that sort of took me down this rabbit hole, and I branched out into creating interactive artworks, digital artworks, all in this like real-time generative paradigm.
So one of the things that Art Republic is incredibly passionate about is this idea of digital aesthetics and moving beyond content and putting art in our public places. And it really defines the ethos of the artists that we work with in our collective. And you guys have been such a core part of our collective, really because of your sense of style. You have this really unique sense of sensuality and understanding of composition and balance and movement that defines your work. I wanted to see if you could each speak about your creative process. I know, of course, working with code, I definitely want for you to share, Lars, too. This is all code driven. So if you can imagine turning an algorithm into something that looks like a painting, I mean, that's pretty remarkable. So do you start with that sense of that feeling that you're trying to convey from the beginning? How does it, talk to you about your creative process and your visual language?
Yeah, gladly. So I've been really interested in color in particular. When it comes to color on a screen, it's always displayed as a combination of just 3 simple colors, red, green, and blue. And it's kind of a hack because of how our eyes work. Our eyes have 3 cone cells in them, and those are sensitive to largely 3 ranges of light. And a lot of digital rendering as a result sort of is done through that lens. So for these works here, actually, what I've been really curious about doing and trying to execute on is starting from the perspective of treating light as a digital object that's more physically based. So looking at it in terms of a collection of both wavelengths and phases, and not just reducing it to those 3 RGB components. And what that lets you do is it lets you explore reality through a slightly different lens, where you can change the laws of physics and tweak them slightly and explore aesthetics as if they were coming from an otherworldly place. And I think that the sense of wonder and curiosity that you can build on by looking at reality but changing the rules a little bit has always really driven me, both from just wanting to make more art, but also in terms of what I want to surface when I make the art that I do.
Yeah, I wish I could say that I was smart enough to approach it like these guys with code and everything. I'm kind of a hack in that way, but I'm also a musician, and if I could explain it, I'm kind of more of a sampler when it comes to the art that I make. I'll kind of maybe go outside and shoot the clouds for a while and then take that footage and just mess with it and put stuff on it, change the colors, rip it out, and then export it, and then take that video, put it back in, and do it again and again. And over the years of working with Jessica, there's some pieces that, it's the same piece, but just in different iterations over the years of me just pulling things and using new tools to kind of mess with it. I'm not really a technical person in that aspect of like code or any kind of really complicated things. I always say, give me some knobs and sliders and I'll make something cool. Because I think that at the end of the day, like, nobody knows the process. They just see the final work. So I kind of felt insecure about that, for a while, but then I started to lean into the fact that, however you get to the final result, and if it affects somebody and makes someone happy or feel anything, I think that that's the point. And so I care less about process as much as kind of like the outcome feeling, making me feel something. So that's kind of like what I run by.
Yeah, I'm just going to piggyback off something. People sometimes do focus too much on process, and it's really, they miss the fact that it's the artist's eye that in the end creates the artwork, and I feel that very much in my own process. I think I use a software called Touch Designer, and a lot of people use Touch Designer, but I think the important part is knowing when the work's done, and it's our eyes and our taste that sort of dictate where we go with the software, and when we decide, all right, there is nothing that is upsetting me about this piece, it's finished, and that, I think that's what creates a true artistic perspective. But yeah, that being said, my process is in a software called Touch Designer, which is a very cool software because it allows me to work in real time. So I do use a lot of code in my work, but I don't like coding itself because I find coding to be very slow. You have to write out the code and then compile the code and then see what the result is and then go back and recompile after you've made changes. But Touch Designer sort of allows you to work in real time with knobs and sliders, and it's sort of like a node tree where you connect these different sources. They could be visual, they could be audio, they could be data, and you sort of create this in a real-time environment, which allows for a very expressive, I'm a big fan of flow states, and any way that you can get into a flow state while working, I think you produce really good work, and Touch Designer sort of facilitates that.
Yeah, all of you work a lot with AI, and of course AI is embedded in everyone's life at this point, and we've always say within Art Republic, when we're talking to different colleagues and collaborators and clients, that in an AI-enabled future, it is those with great taste who will define culture. And I always challenge them that whenever you guys are using these tools, your output is insanely from a whole nother dimension compared to a layman who's doesn't have quite the understanding of architecture or history or design. I mean, all of you are so well versed in so much rich cultural information that inspires your work. So where do you get your inspiration from your style? What are some of the other outlets that fill you up and give you new input?
I mean, I think it's a lot of things. I enjoy nature. I think I'm sort of moving more away from this in my work, but when I first started out, I was obsessed with creating complex organic systems, and I spent a long time in the software trying to make something as complex like an organism. It's a digital painting, but it's moving in a sort of coherent way, but in a very organic way. And yeah, I think my style is quite maximalist in that way because I'm always trying to have these incredibly detailed compositions with lots of things going on. I tend to stay away from minimalism. So yeah, nature was a big influence on that, and just seeing how systems work, seeing how, clouds themselves are their own form of generative system with different inputs such as heat, moisture, and the sunlight and day cycles, and then interpreting that in the digital world and how I could create these worlds. Another thing I'd like to do a lot, which I do in my piece, which is the sort of blue and yellow looking brush-based one, is just engaging with art history. I think it's really important for digital artists especially to engage with art history and interface with that tradition. So what I've been doing a lot of in this piece is studying brush strokes, studying the pure technique of painting, and sort of interpreting that in a digital world where I can literally create my own brush. I can create a brush that reacts to my hand gestures in super unique ways, different ways of reacting to pressure, and then sort of interfacing with art history to create this new kind of expression.
Yeah, I think as far as inspiration goes, I draw a lot from music. I think I love listening to music when I work, and I love the mindset that it puts me in. And I think when it comes to something I've been really interested in recently, it's the work of Steve Reich, who I think I first heard him when I was a teenager and thought he was kind of boring and wrote him off because it sounded too repetitive. And it wasn't until I heard his work again a few years ago that something really clicked, and I think he does this wonderful job of taking just the most basic elements of melody and rhythm and counterpoint and bringing them together in such a way where he creates these very rich and intricate soundscapes that speak to me a lot in terms of my work and my process of trying to start with very small basic building blocks, but also the lens through which he works sounds very inherently generative, and I think that there's, at least for me, like a long-standing project to write an album that's entirely generated by a program, much in the style of Steve Reich. But I also find photography to be a big influence. I think that what's so fascinating with code-based work is that you are not only creating a system to be drawn, but you're also, in a sense, every time creating the camera that captures it. And the way you program that camera has a huge impact on the way the final piece looks. And what's kind of funny is when you program these cameras by hand, some very familiar concepts like aperture, shutter speed, motion blur, all kind of fall out of the code natively without even having to program them there in the first place, which I find those kinds of connections very fascinating.
Yeah, for me, music is a huge influence on my work and where I get inspiration from. As a kid, I remember I would hear music and close my eyes and I would see colors. And I thought everybody was like that. And it wasn't until I heard about this thing called synesthesia, where your senses are kind of crossed. Some people hear a sound and taste a tomato. But for me, when I hear music, I kind of see these abstract gradients. So for a long time, for me, it was about trying to recreate what I saw when I closed my eyes. And it doesn't happen every time, which kind of even makes it more special, because when something affects me or brings me to tears, I remember what I saw in that moment. And it's just kind of like this whole process of me trying to recreate something that happened, very naturally in my imagination.
I think that's so consistent in all of your works. A lot of times, because digital art as a medium is only become mainstream very recently, people are looking at it and they don't always know how to look at it and understand why is this piece special. And I always encourage people, just like the values of art have been the same for generations. Either you're bringing something new to the medium, you have a deep understanding of composition, of color theory, of how to create balance and harmony in a piece. So as you're watching these pieces, it's really great to sit with them and understand that, and understand why these artists are so special and why they're making such an impact on the medium. So next, one of the other things that we all talk about collectively together, especially within the world of digital art, is digital disruption. We've had so much new technology enter our lives so quickly that we all know that we have addiction to our phones, and we have such overload. There's advertising fatigue, and it's like, how do people get messages out when we're bombarded with digital all the time? So we take a very optimistic approach and believe that there will come a day shortly where we are all challenged to be much more intentional around the digital experiences that we are putting out in the world. So I wanted to do an exercise where we look 10 years out and you guys share, what are some of the potentials of how you think we can design spaces that are using technology in a more conscious way?
Yeah, I think even the process of us holding this phone and looking down, I think pretty soon we'll be looking through whatever it is. And so we won't, have this kind of distraction that is very visible. I think the idea that I could be talking to you and also watching a basketball game right now, or doing a million other things, I think it's gonna be harder to tell the difference between when people are actually listening to you or not. But I do believe that when you see very tangible things like someone playing a guitar, or someone painting something, or just having a really beautiful conversation, I think it will mean more because of all the technology, because it's so easy to just have something play the most beautiful piano thing you've ever heard. But when you see somebody make a mistake, I think errors will become even more beautiful in the future. I think mistakes, flaws, which inherently is a huge part of art, right? Making mistakes and then taking the credit for them.
Yeah, going with the lens of being very optimistic and maybe a bit too idealistic, I feel like in 10 years it'd be wonderful to live in a world where we don't have advertising in its current form. And I don't know what a world like that would fully look like, and if it's even really possible to not have advertising, since it seems to underpin so much of our modern lives. But I think if we go out onto the streets, our public spaces are filled with ads. If we open up our phones, our digital spaces are filled with ads. The apps that keep us so addicted to our phones are meant to both learn our preferences and then also feed us new preferences for things to buy and who to be and what to want. And I would love to see a future where that space is filled with art instead, which again, very optimistic and no idea if that's even feasible, but yeah.
Well, I'm going to offer a possibility for how that could happen. So yeah, Jessica mentioned this before, and it's something that I've talked to her about too, and that is advertising fatigue. And I think that is becoming a very real thing. People are very sick of being advertised to, and we could enter an age where direct advertising is so negatively perceived that it actually harms brands to advertise to people. And I think that there could be a new model, which is more of a patronage model. So instead of like a Intel ad, you see an artwork that's powered by Intel that is relevant to the brand, but it is an artwork. It is these brands connecting with artists to create experiences together. And you see this more and more now. I think Microsoft has a recent series where they're doing these digital artworks along with creators and that are pushing the boundaries in the digital realm. And I think that could be a real space that opens up there, where you have this more patronage model of advertising where a brand is just sponsoring a really beautiful artwork and then it's sort of relevant to the brand, so people see that they've powered this artwork and it's sort of like is good for the brand and good for the artist. And I see this in a lot of areas, because there's a sort of a push-pull right now in many areas, in politics as well as in social media, where we realize that we can sort of just hijack other people's brains, and we can just do things with social media, with politicians, with all of these different things that directly hijack people's feelings and especially the lower levels of people's like dopamine systems to addict them to social media, to pull them into these political movements. And I think we've got to find a way past that, and I'm optimistic that we will be able to do that. But this is just one of the ways that we could sort of break out of that. Instead of hijacking somebody's senses to get them to pay more for something, we could hijack higher ideals within their brains to make them want.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good point. We talk about that we're going through a renaissance right now, but that was one of the fundamentals of the Renaissance, was they had this urge and desire to make their people more wise and enlightened, and understood that if you let your people live amongst beauty, then they live in harmony together. So one of the other things that you guys do, especially Rio and Ben, I know you guys have created, you did not mention this when you went through your bio, which was quite humble of you, but you have commanded crowds with your artwork, from the Sphere to concert visuals, and have this deep understanding of how to hold someone's attention. So how does that influence when you're making work, or how are you feeling through how it's going to hold a viewer's attention?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, recently I created a series of real-time artworks for the Sphere in Vegas, where we were the first people to use Touch Designer to create these real-time experiences at an absurd, like 20K resolution. We had a render farm of 35 different computers rendering different slices, all in sync to make this huge experience. Sphere is like instantly attention grabbing. It is so colossal. It's hard to describe if you haven't been there, but if you're ever in Vegas, you should definitely check it out. Just see the Darren Aronofsky film or whatever's on at the time, because it really is like real life VR, and the visuals fill your field of vision. You have to turn your head to see all the visuals, and so it's got an instantly baked in way of grabbing attention, just is colossally large. But, and that's a great way to grab attention, just make these colossally large digital experiences. But I think there is also something in designing digital artworks that are able to attract people and then pull them in, because we have these social media apps that are constantly bombarding you with dopamine. Like the scroll is a new thing every 15, 30 seconds maximum. It's often every 5 seconds. And so it is something that I think about in my work of how do you capture attention with a digital artwork. Because generative artworks to me are very interesting in that you can sit with them for a very long time and they are constantly changing. You're not going to see the same thing over and over again if it's rendering in real time, which we're seeing a lot more. Institutions put public artworks that are generative, are real time, and there are more and more ways to experience these generative real time artworks. How do you do something that captures an audience and then sort of pulls them in and then makes them stay there for a while? And so that's something I think about a lot, and in my work it's often a combination of sound and visuals that draw you in with an initial image that is very provocative in that it might be very complex, very intricate, and people's brains instantly connect with this and then they want to come closer. And then that opens up a window for people to experience these longer.
Yeah, I think I like what you said about social media in particular. I think it's this inherent tension where social media rewards having very short clips that are very attention-grabbing, but I think that my own style really gravitates towards things that evolve slowly and that move slowly and are rewarding to sit with, which isn't really great for Instagram Reels, but it is something to always think about when you're creating. And I think where that winds up taking me is, I think, into a space where I try to follow what I find interesting, which is sort of trying to captivate a sense of wonder. Growing up, I think my favorite things were watching shows like PBS Nova or How It Works, or reading or watching How It's Made. And I think that sort of sense of how does this tick, how does this work, and that sort of curiosity that comes with that is a feeling that I try to evoke, and I think is something that does reward attention and does reward sitting with something, which, again, not great for the sort of outlets where we generally post artwork on today, but I think is, at the very least, where I try to push my own work towards.
Yeah, man. I'm still learning a lot about attention span and what works and what's too much. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, and even Ben saying, like, I'm kind of a maximalist. Like, I like to take up a lot of space. But in the concert visuals world, especially with scale, like, a lot of times it's like way too much information to process for a lot of people. So, you know, there's lights, there's music, there's sometimes like pyro effects, like fire coming out. And so if you have a bunch of stuff on the screen and all of that, it can be like really overwhelming very quickly. Even like when you think about strobes and some people having epilepsy, it's like you have to be really mindful of how much information you're pouring into people. And in doing concerts, like there's been so many moments I've had to, like, it's one thing to make it on your computer right here, you know, or look it out on your phone, but when you see it at such a giant scale, it's so different. So more recently, like, I've just been like learning about just restraint, you know. I think the beauty of getting older is that something that took you a page to say, you know, as you get older, then it takes you 2 paragraphs and then hopefully just a sentence. And I'm trying to get there in my own art, is to just say everything that I feel with this least amount of words or noise or excess.
That's perfect. So that leads me into our last closing statement. If you had a viewer in front of your work, what is your highest hope of what they would feel when they're in front of any one of your works?
Yeah, I think attention is like the most important commodity right now. So if someone was looking at my work and they stopped thinking about their job or having to walk their dog or do something else, and they just were kind of curious or asked some questions, or maybe even if it inspired them to want to make some art of their own. I just want people to feel something, you know? And some pieces are more specific to me, but one of my favorite things is when people tell me that it made them feel something that I'd never even expected. And that's the beautiful thing about art.
I always love watching. You always observe and ask people, and you're always watching to see their reactions in the crowd.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. I think the most rewarding is when someone sees something or feels something that you really had no anticipation for. But if I were to set some guidelines, I'd say I would hope that people feel a sense of calm and a sense of wonder, and in some sense some joy too and optimism. But yeah.
I would say it's quite similar to these other two, but I would say transcendence. I would like my works to evoke this feeling that there is a lot more to life than we all seem to get bogged down in day-to-day work, doing things, and I would like my artworks to evoke this sort of sense of transcending the day-to-day, the sense of realizing that we're all this one connected entity, and that there is so much beauty and art beyond the day-to-day in our heads and in the world, and if they can get that into their mind, that would be ideal for me.
Beautiful. Do we have any questions for the artist? Any questions? Okay. No? Well, thank you so much. And, one of the things that I hope that everybody who is throughout these buildings will have, digital art now throughout the Hudson Square properties. And I'm so excited to have you guys a part of the medium. This is by far the fastest growing medium in art history. It has become the most accessible. These are the artists who are leading it. And I think that we have a real opportunity to build these moments that bring everything they spoke about, from moments of wellness, states of presence, creates moments of calm in our life throughout our public spaces. So thank you so much for being a part of this.